home, although you probably can't hear me at home because I'm not mic'd up. But that's okay. Special morning this morning because we have with us two very special missionary friends from Japan. The Evans, Tony and Debbie Evans, have been in Japan for 32 years. 32 years. And so finally they decided to come back to Australia. Visiting to let us know what they're doing and how things are going. So our church is supporting them. We have supported them for a long time. And so Pastor Evans, if you'd like to come and do what it is you're going to do. I think you're going to show us a video or something. And so do pay attention. This will be interesting, people. No snoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Well, good morning. As Pastor said, I'm Tony Evans, and that's my wife, Debbie, back there. We've been in Japan for 32 and a half years. Yeah. And we don't come back to Australia very often. We've been here 2 weeks. Now we're making plans to leave again in about less than 2 weeks' time. And the main reason for that is because the work that we're doing is in Japan, not Australia. So the more time we can spend there, the more time we can spend doing what God has called us to do. How many am I meeting for the first time today? Yeah, a good many of us. So I grew up in Sydney. I studied Japanese in high school, right through university. I did a BA majoring in Japanese. I went to Metropolitan Baptist Church in Lane Cove. It was in Chatswood to start with, and then in Lane Cove when it moved. We were married in 1986. We knew that the Lord was calling us both individually to be missionaries. We both had that perspective before we met. And so it was simply a matter of God was leading us together and in the same direction. So when I proposed to Debbie on the night before her 18th birthday, I said to her, would you be willing to go to Japan as my wife? And she said, yep. And that's how it all started. But we both had total assurance that that's what God was doing with our lives, and so it was all very natural. We lived for 3 years in the Southern Highlands in Mittagong Barrel area. We worked in the church there to get some experience. And then in January of 1992, with two small children, we moved to Hokkaido. Hokkaido is the northernmost of the four main islands of Japan. And we moved to a town at that stage, which was just a town called Hiroshima. And people used to ask us if that had anything to do with the Second World War. And it was not the town that was bombed in the Second World War. That's way down south. But our town was originally settled by people who'd moved up from there to the northern frontier. So when they came, they brought the name of their hometown. And as our town grew, it grew from a town to being classified as a city. And they couldn't call it Hiroshima City because there already was one of those. So they called it Hiroshima of the North, or Kita Hiroshima, which is now the current name. It's about 60,000 people in our town. It's a commuter city, a commuter town to Sapporo. Sapporo is the 5th largest city in Japan, the largest city north of Tokyo. Sapporo has about 2 million people. Our island has about 5 million people. Our town was pretty much unknown until about 2 years ago when the professional baseball team, the Nippon Ham Fighters, which is one of 12 major league teams in Japan, built a brand new stadium within walking distance from our house. And all of a sudden, everybody in Japan knows everything about our town. And so with that new development, the town is going through a rebranding, if you like, and a growth phase. And we see that as a great place to be, to continue serving the Lord and winning souls. So I'm going to share a short video which sort of sums up the history of the work in Japan. And then after that, for the rest of Sunday school time, I'm just going to have question and answer. Maybe there's things you'd like to ask us about our life and our ministry. So take notes through the video, and then I'll be happy to answer anything afterwards.
Hi, I'm Tony Evans. My family and I have been serving in Japan as missionaries for over 32 years now. Back in January of 1992, when we were about 25, Debbie and I took our young family to Kitahiroshima in Hokkaido, and that has been our home ever since. I had studied Japanese for 10 years before we made the big move, and so we were blessed to have a head start on our ministry that most other missionaries here do not experience. Debbie, on the other hand, had not studied Japanese and has had to work hard on language acquisition during our time here. When we left Australia, we said goodbye to family and friends with the thought that we would minister here until the Lord takes us to heaven. In fact, for the last 3 decades or more, this has been our life and passion, and that's why we don't even have much opportunity to visit Australia. For the entire period of our service here, we've been faithfully supported by many churches, mostly in Australia. Without your partnership, both financially and in prayer and encouragement, this endeavour would not humanly have been possible. Kitahiroshima is a town of about 60,000 people, located about 25 kilometres southeast of Sapporo, the largest city north of Tokyo. Although our summers are quite temperate, winters are extreme, with temperatures dropping as low as minus 20 degrees and as much as 5 metres of snowfall each season. Our city, Hiroshima, was unknown even to most Japanese people until last year. But last year, when professional baseball team, the Nippon Ham Fighters, chose to build a brand new ballpark, they did so right in our own backyard. Now, with over 30,000 fans attending more than 80 games per season, our city is well and truly on the map, and it has started to change. When we first came to this sleepy country town, we started out by immersing ourselves in the local community and then opening an English school where we taught English and Bible. God used this strategy to give us many contacts, to give us many opportunities to learn about our new adopted people, and even to give us our first convert. For the first 20 years, we saw very slow growth, but we always rejoiced in on average 1 person per year that we saw come to Christ and who would eventually be added to the church. But about 12 years ago, slowly things started to change, and then the ministry spiraled upward. There were probably a few reasons why. Firstly, our family took up permanent residence here, which outwardly was cementing our commitment to the task. By faith, we moved the church to a property in a very prominent location across the road from the City Hall. And finally, after spending 2 decades working hard seeking to build a foundation of soul winning and discipleship, that foundation was finally starting to bear fruit. And so, with a vision to train up the next generation, also we had started a Bible Institute in the church. Around the same time, we constituted the church, and this also was a sign of our commitment towards autonomy. And also recently we had sent out one of our young ladies to another Bible college who had then married a pastor, Pastor Irie, and together they were pioneering a new church in Nagano Prefecture. So Suzuran was now starting to reproduce itself in the form of another church. During the 8 years that followed after we moved there, we grew from about 20 believers to around 50. During this growth period, many things happened. we saw many of the ministries in the church grow and other new ministries began. We started to work towards gaining incorporation or legal status with the government, and then after that purchasing property which was to become our permanent church premises. And still the ministry continued to grow, and along the way the Lord was also entrusting us with the responsibility of training new missionaries coming to the field, as well as helping younger national pastors and other missionaries in many parts of Japan. Finally, in 2019, Shoalhaven Bible Baptist Church was able, miraculously, to purchase the property for which we had been praying. So this new permanent identity, along with our upgraded online presence, has continued to fuel church growth. Now, Shoalhaven is a vibrant church where over 70 people gather to worship and serve God. Currently, the church is still repaying a mortgage on this property, and this will take another 7 or 8 years at the current rate. But once these financial commitments are cleared, we envision that the church will be in a better position to financially support the next generation of pastors. This then will pave the way for the final steps towards autonomy. Today, the Evans children are all continuing their lives in different parts of Japan, and 2 are still serving with us here at Shoalhaven. Malachi is a blessing heading up the young adults ministry. His vision is to continue working and supporting the ministry as he builds his life here. Shuto and Susanna and baby Isla are committed to serving full-time in the work here as the Lord provides. Now, 14 years from the inception of our Bible Institute, plans are being laid for our first graduation ceremony, and Lord willing, Susanna will be the first graduate in January of 2025. Her husband, Shuto, is one of 4 other students who are also striving towards gaining the necessary 120 credits for graduation, and hopefully they won't be too far behind. As we look ahead, we ask that you continue to share our vision for the work here. Although progress is slower than in many other parts of the world, God is surely building a work that will cross generations and continue to bear fruit for eternity as long as the Lord tarries his coming. Please pray for those whom the Lord is raising up to carry Shoalhaven Bible Baptist Church forward even after we hand the baton over. Shuto and Susanna Yoshida. Currently they are serving in ministries related to preaching, children, youth, music, audiovisual resources, our online presence, administration, and many other areas. Also, Sekito and Rachel Yamagami, who are currently serving in ministries related to preaching, children's ministries, the legal side of administration, and ministry to the elderly. Maho Imamoto, who is currently serving in our church nursery, in music, and as our Sunday school director. And of course, please pray also for Tony and Debbie. Over the next few years, as we prepare to step back from leading Shoalhaven, we believe that God would have us to continue here, training and mentoring the next generation through our Bible Institute, helping new missionaries make a good start on the field, and working with other national pastors and missionaries across Japan. Our goal to serve here until Christ calls us home to heaven remains unchanged, and we trust that you will continue to partner with us. Thank you for your love, your prayers, and your support for the Evans family here in Japan and for Shoalhaven Bible Baptist Church. Only eternity will show the true value of our partnership together. We continue to strive for much fruit in Japan that will remain.
So hopefully that helps you to understand a little bit about the ministry. As the video said, we moved into the town, Kita Hiroshima, and at that time we started from zero, just our family, and that's what the Lord's allowed us to do over the last 30 years, just step by step, bit by bit, and we continue to seek to move forward. So I'd love to have some questions from you this morning.
That was Brother Matthews.
It was.
He must have visited sometime in the last couple of years.
So Brother Matthews was obviously the pastor that I grew up under. And when we left in 1992, he was the pastor that led our ordination and commissioning. They sent us out. And within us arriving in Japan 1 to 2 years after that, their role at Metropolitan changed, and then the church moved on. we thought we may never see them again. But a few years back, Metropolitan had them visit for the 40th anniversary of the church.
Yes.
And so we were able to coordinate for them to do a 3-day stopover in Japan on the way home, which was our chance for them to see their spiritual grandchildren, great-grandchildren in Japan. It was a really special time that we had together. We hadn't seen them for over 20 years, so it was very special.
Yeah, after I was converted, I was at Metropolitan, not Lane Cove, Chatswood.
Chatswood,
For
yes.
a little while.
Uh-huh.
That's probably where we met.
Yes, yes.
Yes, fond memories. I'm so glad that Brother Matthews could visit with you.
Yeah,
I saw him on the 40th anniversary, a dinner or something like that.
yeah.
But I have another question. You're becoming a national Japanese. That was what one of the things your video said.
Permanent residence.
Permanent residence. That's what it was. So, okay. So, how long did that take?
So the minimum qualification to gain permanent residence in Japan is 10 years living there. We had a variety of reasons that we weren't prepared to start on that straight away, even though we were qualified. We took our permanent residence roughly 20 years after we arrived, and the process itself took probably somewhere between 6 to 12 months. Japan's a land of bureaucracy, and so basically I had to submit enough documentation to prove that we were actually going to be permanently resident in Japan. So I ended up handing in a book about this thick of paperwork to get my permanent residence, and then once I had mine, then it was the family after that. But since we got permanent residence, then we were able to get a bank loan to purchase and build our own home, and then that started the process towards the church property and everything else as well.
Yeah, 10 years is not uncommon in foreign countries.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, somebody else.
I'll ask some questions later, I think, but I just want to commend you and your wife and family on your faithfulness, over the years. Very good presentation, we've heard a lot of what you just shared with us, but put it all together and, of course, some new information. Thank you for setting a good example, and thank you for being our missionaries. And we rejoice with you in that little bit you were able to share with us there and how the Lord has blessed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your kind words. And of course, we so much appreciate the church here standing with us and supporting us faithfully all these years. The church started here after we were in Japan, and so basically I think you took us on sight unseen, and I've only visited the church once here in 30 years, so thank you for trusting us in that way and standing with us. We really appreciate that. Yeah.
I think one of the photos was about the special, I don't think it's, do you call it a gravesite or a burial?
The burial plot, yeah.
That you had to purchase
Mm-hmm.
for Christians. Can you sort of explain what that means and the importance of it, and does that do away with the custom, with some of the customs that
Japanese
the pounding afterwards and all that sort of, I don't quite know how to say it.
No.
It's so different culturally, but
Yeah.
the Christian aspect of why that was important
Yes.
for the church, and the other part is, with the Christians, now, what happens to the ashes?
Mhm.
Do they put them in their homes,
Mhm.
or are they in the church burial site?
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me unpack a little bit. So let me wind the clock back a little bit further than burial. In Japan, there are two main religions, Shintoism and Buddhism. Shintoism is the indigenous religion of Japan, and their folklore says that the great goddess in the sky, Amaterasu Mikami, one day reached down and put her finger in the ocean and pulled up Japan, and that was the beginning of civilization on the earth. Of course, we all know that it didn't quite happen like that. And I don't think there's many Japanese that actually believe that, but that's where the folklore starts. So Shintoism is a cross between emperor worship, nature worship, and even ancestor worship. And 85% roughly of Japanese would say that they are Shinto. The second religion is Buddhism, which was introduced from China through the Korean Peninsula, probably in the 6th century AD. Today, probably at 75 to 85, depends what statistics you look at, but almost a similar amount of the Japanese population would say they are Buddhist. So that means our population has about 170%. What it actually means is most people are both. The two religions coexist without any problem, because neither of them demand the person be solely connected to that religion. So the way it works is Shintoism is more a religion of preventative medicine, if you like, guarding against bad luck and things like that, and celebration of the different parts of the life cycle. Whereas Buddhism is a religion of death, once in Japan. It's different to Buddhism in other parts of the world, but once somebody dies, that's when Buddhism starts, with all the ceremonies of death and the anniversaries and so on that go on for up to 50 years after the person dies. So when a person dies in Japan, they're very, very concerned about what happens to their remains. For the Japanese, that's very important. So most Japanese families would have a family crypt. In Japan, we don't bury. There's no space to bury 120 million people in something 1/20th of the size of Australia. And so basically cremation is the only option. The process that you were talking about for the Japanese, the mourning process, starts from the minute the person dies. They call in a Buddhist priest, and they pay him to chant sutras and to burn incense. And they believe that the deceased has started on a 49-day journey to get to wherever it is that they're going, and that there's a responsibility on those remaining to help them in their journey. And that comes through burning incense, giving offerings, and paying large amounts of money to the Buddhist temple. And they can also purchase a new name for the deceased person. And of course, the more you spend, the fancier the name. And so you can see how this is very much a money-making thing. And so each day the Buddhist priest will come and change the incense and recite sutras. Where we live, the funeral only is usually 2 to 3 days after death. It's very quick, so it's very intense and very rushed. So we'll have a nighttime funeral service, and then traditionally the bereaved, the nearest of kin, would stay overnight in whatever building it is with the body, and the spirits come and they commune or whatever. And then the next morning we have a second funeral service, and then they're taken to the crematorium, and the family would go together to the crematorium. They commit them to the kiln. They wait. They have lunch together while the body's being cremated, and then an hour and a half, 2 hours later, when the body comes out and its remains, then they take chopsticks and gather up the remains into an urn. The body is not completely cooked, and so you can still make out the hip, the skull, the major limbs, and so forth. And so then they have like a pestle to pound the ashes into the urn to make it fit. They also believe that the voice box has a special spiritual function, and so traditionally they would have a separate urn just for the voice box, because that's where the spirit dwells, so to speak. So then they would take the urn home and continue to burn incense until 49 days have passed and they've so-called finished their journey. And then the ashes would then be interred into the family altar or the family crypt. And so that's 7 weeks. How much of that changes? So the crypt itself and the burial is very much a Buddhist experience. And so when people become Christian, their heart's desire is to not be buried in that Buddhist way with all the religion and the worship. And each time they do these different things with the incense and the altar and all that, the Japanese people are actually worshipping the spirit of the deceased. And so as a Christian, they don't want to be worshipped. They want their bereaved relatives to know that they're in a better place, that they want them to be in also. But the problem arises in the fact that for Japanese, it's part of your Japaneseness to be buried in the family crypt in the Buddhist way. And so there's a huge conflict. And so to change the burial rite is to become not Japanese. And so this is often a very big point of conflict with new believers and their families. The first point of conflict arises when a relative dies and they don't want to go to the funeral to worship because we don't worship that way. We don't worship ancestors and spirits and whatever. And so that's a major barrier for new Christians to overcome. And then, of course, it's a constant thing in their mind. What are going to happen to my ashes after I die? I really don't want to have my ashes go through that process that people are going to worship me. So as a church, purchasing a piece of property at the local graveyard and building a crypt that we can use for the church people is a solution to that problem. You saw a couple of photographs of the burial crypt there. I can't remember, I think it cost us something like $30,000 to buy the rights to that piece of ground and get the masonry work done. That crypt has in it capacity for about 45 urns. They're sort of this kind of size. And then also we have a pit where we can actually empty the urns for another 100, roughly, people's worth of remains. So we're assuming that the Lord's going to come back before we have 150 people in there. So basically, we think we've got enough. So what changes when they die? I go to the house instead of the Buddhist priest, and we pray and we thank the Lord for what's happened, for that person's life, and for the fact that we know where they are. I still work with the funeral director, and depending on what arrangements they've made, if they're just using a secular funeral director, then I have to educate the funeral director that we're not going to do this, that and the other. There are one or two Christian funeral companies on our island that we have a good relationship with, and that's always much easier. So we have to have a balance between following the things that unsaved family would expect without compromising what we are and who we are as Christians. So first of all, we would have a time of prayer. To them, it's a significant moment putting the body into the coffin. So we usually have a special time, Bible reading and a word of prayer as they do that. In Japan, often the body will stay at the home until the funeral. It doesn't go to the undertakers. And so originally it's on a futon with a blanket over it and dry ice. And then once it's put into the casket, then that remains in the home. And then in most cases, the body will go from the home to where the funeral service is being held. Often we'll still do the 2 funeral services, one at night, next morning, depending on what they want. The practicality is some people can come out at night, some people can get off work the next day, so it's helpful to do both, but not always. We don't generally stay overnight with the body. And so each time we have one of these steps in the process, we keep reminding them that we're thanking God for this person and what they meant to us, and worshipping Him as the giver of life. From there, the only way to dispose of the body is still the crematorium, so that doesn't change. We still go to the crematorium, it's still cremated, the body comes out, the bones still have to get into the urn, so we still have to do that. The people that run the crematorium are public servants, and they're not going to do that on your behalf, so that is still the responsibility of the family to amalgamate the remains into the urn. Then what happens after that, they take the urn home. Some some families are happy to have them interred straight away. Some families like to keep the ashes at home for a while. They feel a sense of connection. But ultimately being able to put them into the church grave means that they don't have to worry about the other side of things, and also it gives them a sense of security. So in a sense, when our church purchased that property, it made us more official and more reliable as a church, that people have somewhere to go when they die other than just heaven. Yeah. But that's the way it works. Somebody else? Yeah.
Just wondering, what is the biggest difficulty you guys would have faced when witnessing, trying to do outreach and such?
Yeah. I don't know which one's the biggest, but there's lots. What would you say the difficulties are in Australia? Disinterest. What other barriers do you have here?
Convincing people there's a God that they have to give accounts to.
Convincing people that there's a God and that they're accountable. I would say worldliness, materialism, hedonism, distraction, self-sufficiency, and modernist thinking. We have all of that in Japan, plus the religion, plus the fact that they don't understand. Japanese themselves don't see the line between culture and religion, because the two are very much intertwined. So as us as foreigners walking in and we see them putting their hands together and bowing and worshipping in front of a grave, to us that's very clearly idol worship. To them, that's just being Japanese. And so helping them to understand these differences. All of those things. Family pressure because of what I mentioned before. Some of them, their families reject them when they become Christians. So just so much. And I think the other thing is, in Japan, everything takes a long time. Nothing happens quickly. So I can remember when the Gulf War was on and the Allied countries were all offering support to the war going on in the Middle East. The Japanese went to Parliament. And around about the time that the war finished, they finally came up with the conclusion that we could send backline aid. But it was too late. And everything in Japan works like that. And so Japanese generally are very slow and very reserved before they'll make such a huge change in their life, even if they are convinced. Oh, yeah, and then the other thing is you don't communicate directly in Japanese either. That is considered barbaric. And so Westerners that come in and just tell them that they have a need and eternity's at stake and blah, 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 that just does not connect. That builds up a wall. And so we have to build connection, then we have to build friendship, then we have to build trust. And then once we have that foundation, then slowly we talk about the things that they need to know. And generally speaking in Japanese, the thing that you don't say is the thing that you're really trying to say. And so you become good at saying what you're not saying, but by saying it and so that they understand. Otherwise, if you go too quick, it just puts up shutters all along the way. There's just a multiplicity of things that make it difficult. Was there another? Yeah.
Yeah, just wondering why you chose Japan.
The Lord used my studies of the Japanese language to lead me to Japan. Also, the part of Sydney I grew up in, there were a lot of Japanese families there. In my neighbourhood, we're not far from the Japanese school in Terry Hills. So I was just always around Japanese people. And then at the end of year 11, I went on a 1-month exchange. We had a sister school in Nagano, in Kofu in Yamanashi Prefecture. And I can remember going up on a lookout one day while I was there, and I was looking out over this little country town of 200,000 people and knowing that there's no gospel witness there. And I think that was the image that the Lord really used to grasp my heart. So I came back to year 12 praying, God, call me to be a missionary. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Tony, obviously you're ministering with other Christians in Japan. What is the state of reaching the country? Is it happening, and you're finding that Japan is turning to Christ, or it's just?
So Japan is right at the far eastern corner of the 1040 window, which qualifies it as amongst the most unreached people of the world. In free countries that aren't restricted by, say, Islam or communism, we're probably at the bottom of the list for being reached. Less than 0.5% of the population would be considered Christian, despite the efforts that have been there. Missionaries have been able to go freely into Japan for the last 150 years. Back in the 1500s, the Jesuits were in Japan, and like they did in anywhere in Southeast Asia, their basic purpose was to control, dominate, and take what they could get. And the Japanese were very aware of that very quickly, so they expelled the Jesuits. They closed their country to the outside world, and it wasn't until the late 1800s that people like Commander Perry and that from the US forced them to open and to recommence trade agreements. So once the door was finally forced open, Protestant missionaries came in very quickly. They were a backward third world country with zero technology because they'd been closed. And so the Protestant missionaries came in with a lot of technology as well as the gospel. And they did a lot of good. But again, the Japanese are slow. Everything is slow. So then you have the First, then you have the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, obviously they were totally humiliated by the bombing and totally destroyed. So then General MacArthur calls for 1,000 missionaries to come with 10,000 Bibles, and many missionaries came. And that was kind of complex because their first exposure to Christianity was the Jesuits. Their second exposure to Christianity was the helpful Protestants. Their third exposure to Christianity was the atomic bomb dropped on them by so-called Christians. And so then these same Americans coming in with another gospel and so forth was met with a lot of mixed reactions. However, they were humbled and they were needy. And those are probably the two greatest qualifications to be saved. And so there was a great harvest of souls after the Second World War. However, between 1945 and say 1980, Japan took themselves from being totally decimated to the second largest economy in the world, and they did it basically on their own backs of hard work. And so all of a sudden, by that time, self-sufficiency has kicked in. And so they look at, well, America destroys us, we can rebuild ourselves, why do we need their God? And so then that plus secularism and humanism has really slowed down any progress of the gospel now. The average church in Japan probably has about 30 to 35 members, and the average age of churchgoers in Japan is around 70, 75. The average pastor's age is also in their 70s. So our church is very unique, and that's just the grace of God.
If you can't talk to them directly, how do you convince them to come to church?
So we have to, it's like, well, my dad always says you can draw a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, but you can make him thirsty. And so we have to make church appealing as somewhere that is safe to go. And so most of our outreach events are not a direct gospel preaching service. They're more come along and have fun and meet us, and come and see that church is actually a safe place. And so it has to be very slow. And so we use fun things to make that initial connection. And from there, it builds. So one lady that I led to the Lord recently, she'd come to a number of fun meetings, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago. And slowly over time, different people, different Christians that she was in contact with, gave her bits and pieces of literature, and then she started reading her Bible. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, about a year ago, she sent me a text and said, I'd like to start studying the Bible with you. I've read it through 2 or 3 times, and there's so much I don't understand. And so from there, I took her through our 6-lesson course, and then she finally came to Christ. So many of the people in our church, it's not been a matter of weeks and months, but years or even decades. And something else that many of them have in common is that it took some major trauma, some major crisis in their life to humble them to the point that they would realise that they need the Lord. So that most of the people in that picture have a story of pain. But that's what it took.
You talked about trust a few times, and you talked about in the video the connection that you've built over the years and gaining residency, so forth, helping with that. Just help us understand a little bit about the Japanese mindset and why that's been so helpful for you to cement yourself and show your commitment to being there long term.
Yeah. So often Japanese connection with the West is very transient. Over the years, it's been very difficult for Japanese businesses even to get a foothold in Japan. Japan is a particularly difficult market, and oftentimes people will try, not succeed, and leave. And so the Japanese see this transience amongst foreigners. But obviously when it comes to faith and eternity, you need something that is more stable than that. And so we definitely feel that, you know, when we took out residence, when we built a home, when we incorporated the church, then all of these steps are showing permanence. And it seems that growth spurts have coincided with those all along the way. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting everyone needs their coffee signal here.
Is that coffee we smell?
Thank you.